Hey guys, welcome back. We are doing part A of lesson 10 today for Wit and Wisdom. We're starting a new book today, so I really enjoyed this book and I really like it a lot. So I hope you like it too. So we're busy with our video. All right. Let's get this up here. Let's get started.
Hello, friends. Back to Wit and Wisdom in Sync. My name is Tanisha Spears, and I'm excited to jump into our lesson. But before we do, let's make sure you have your materials ready. For this lesson, you will need your Wit and Wisdom in Sync journal and a pencil. We'll also be using handout 10A, but I'll show that to you on the screen. Pause the video now if you need to gather your materials.
Nope.
In previous work, you had an opportunity to reflect on the knowledge you've gained and the skills you've learned from the text Cinderella, adapted by Marcia Brown, and the text Cendrillon. Today, you will explore a new text. And as you're exploring that text, you will make observations and ask questions. But first, let's think about the essential question, or the big question that you've been exploring throughout this module. That question is, why do people around the world admire Cinderella? Now, let's think about the question that will focus our work with this new text. That question is, why do people admire Rough-Faced Girl and Ella? I want you to think. Do you see any familiar words in this focusing question? Think. You may have pointed out the word admire because admire was in the previous focusing question as well as in the essential question, or the big question. Now remember, admire means to have a lot of respect for someone. You are going to meet two new characters during this arc, or this series of lessons, that you may admire. The first character you're going to meet is Rough-Faced Girl. Let's take a look at the question that will frame our work for today. And that question is, what do I notice and wonder about this text? Before I read the story, you're going to make observations on what you notice and wonder about the covers of the text. The title of this story is The Rough-Faced Girl. It was written by Rafe Martin and illustrated by David Shannon. I want you to take a moment to look at the front and the back covers. What do you notice? Does anything remind you of the other versions of Cinderella that we've explored? Think. Now, share with a learning partner or just share aloud.
I know it's about a girl, and I know that she looks like she works hard.
You might have noticed the girl covering her face and that she has holes in her clothes and bandages on her hands. And maybe this reminded you of Cendrillon, who had blisters on her hands. Now, what do you wonder? Think about the question words we've used before to come up with questions about the text. Are you thinking? Now share your questions with the learning partner or just share aloud.
Why is she hiding her face for? And why does she have bandages on her hands? Is she trying to protect her hands? And who is this girl?
You may have wondered why she is hiding her face or why she has bandages on her hand. You might have also wondered, who is she? And why are there feathers in her hair? And why are there feathers on the back cover? All right, as I read the text aloud to you, I want you to listen for answers to your questions. Not only will you listen for the answers to your questions as I read, you might see these small black and white images on some of the slides as I read aloud. Do you see see the images on your screen?
Mhm.
Great. These images will help you remember key parts of the story for when you retell it later on. All right, let's get into the text. Face Girl by Rafe Martin, illustrated by David Shannon. Once, long ago, there was a village by the shores of Lake Ontario. Off from the other wigwams of this village stood one great huge wigwam. Painted on its sides were pictures of the sun, moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. And inside this wigwam, there was said to live a very great, rich, powerful, and supposedly handsome invisible being. However, no one could see him except his sister, who lived there too. Many women wanted to marry this invisible being, but his sister said, only the one who can see him can marry him. Now, in this village, there lived a poor man who had 3 daughters. The older 2 daughters were cruel and hard-hearted. They made their youngest sister sit by the fire and feed the flames. When the burning branches popped, the sparks fell on her. In time, her hands became burnt and scarred. Her arms became rough and scarred. Even her face was marked by the fire, and her beautiful long black hair hung ragged and charred. And those 2 older sisters laughed at her, saying, "Ha! You're ugly, you rough-faced girl." It made her life very lonely and miserable indeed. One day, these 2 older sisters went to their father and said, "Father, give us some necklaces. Give us some new buckskin dresses. Give us some pretty beaded moccasins. We're going to marry the invisible being." So their father gave them these things. Dressed in their finest, the 2 girls marched through the village. All the people pointed and stared. "Look at those beautiful girls," they said. "Surely they shall marry the invisible being." And if those 2 girls were proud and hard-hearted before, they were even prouder now. They walked haughtily through the village. At last, they came to the wigwam of the invisible being. There was his sister, waiting. "Why have you come?" she asked. "We want to marry the invisible being," they answered. "That's why we're here." "If you want to marry my brother," she replied, "you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen the invisible being?" "Of course we've seen him," they insisted. "Can't you see how pretty we are? Can't you see the beautiful clothes we wear? Oh, yes, anyone can tell that we've truly seen the invisible being." "All right," she said quietly. "If you think you've seen him, then tell me, what's his bow made of?" And suddenly, her voice was swift as lightning and strong as thunder. "His bow?" They stammered in surprise. "His bow. We know." But turning desperately to one another, they whispered, "What shall we say?" "Let's say it's the oak tree." So they said, "It's the great oak tree." "No," said the sister of the invisible being. "No." Oh, she saw at once how they lied. "Tell me," she continued, "if you think you've seen my brother, the invisible being, then what's the runner of his sled made of?" We know," cried those 2 sisters. But whispering feverishly again, they wondered, "What shall we say? What shall we say?" "Let's say it's the green willow branch." "No," said the sister when she heard. "No, you have not seen my brother. Now go home." "Just test us fairly," they exclaimed. "We've seen him. Just don't ask us all those silly questions." Now, this seems like an important event. The picture of the wigwam will help us remember that the rough-faced girl's sisters go to the invisible being's wigwam and they lie about being able to see him. "All right," said the sister of the invisible being, "come with me." And she took them back to the great wigwam and set them in the seats furthest from the entrance, the guest seats. Soon they heard footsteps coming along the path. Then something stepped inside. Though they had heard breathing, the 2 sisters still couldn't see a thing. Suddenly, a great bow and a beaded quiver of arrows appeared in the air and were set down. But though those two girls sat there, their eyes wide all through the night, they never saw a thing more. And in the morning, they had to go home ashamed. The next day, the rough-faced girl went to her father and said, "Father, may I please have some beads? May I please have a new buckskin dress and some pretty moccasins? I am going to marry the invisible being, for wherever I look, I see his face." But her father sighed. "Daughter," he said, "I'm sorry. I have no beads left for you. Some little broken shells. I have no buckskin dress, and as for moccasins, all I have left are my own old, worn, cracked, and stretched out pair from last year, and they're much too big." But she said, "Whatever you can spare, I can use." So he gave her these things. Then she found dried reeds, and taking the little broken shells, she strung a necklace. She stripped birch bark from the dead trees and made a cap, a dress, and leggings. Then, with a sharp piece of bone, she carved in the bark pictures of the sun, moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. She went down to the lake shore and soaked the moccasins in the water until they grew soft. Then she molded them to her feet, but they were still too big, and they flapped, flapped, flapped like duck's feet as she walked. Then all of the people came out of their wigwams. They pointed and stared. "Look at that ugly girl," they laughed. "Look at her strange clothes. Hey, 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 go home, you ugly girl. You'll never marry the invisible being." But the rough-faced girl had faith in herself, and she had courage. She didn't turn back. She just kept walking right through the village. This seems like another important event. So the picture of the broken shell will help us remember that the rough-faced girl makes her own clothes and jewelry out of scraps and broken shells so that she can go see the invisible being. As she walked on, she saw the great beauty of the earth and sky spreading before her. And truly, she alone of all in that village saw in these things the sweet yet awesome face of the invisible being. At last, she came to the lakeshore just as the sun was sinking behind the hills and the many stars came glittering out like a fiery veil in the darkening sky overhead. And there, standing by the water's edge, was the sister of the invisible being, waiting. Now, the sister of the invisible being was a wise woman. When she looked at you, she didn't just see your face or your hair or clothes. No. When she looked at you, she would look you right in the eyes, and she could see all the way down to your heart. And she could tell if you had a good, kind heart or a cold, hard, and cruel one. And when she looked at the rough-faced girl, she saw at once that though her skin was scarred, her hair burnt, her clothes strange, she had a beautiful, kind heart. And so she welcomed her dearly, saying, "Ah, my sister, why have you come?" And the rough-faced girl replied, "I have come to marry the invisible being." "Ah," said the sister very gently now. "If you want to marry him, you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen my brother, the invisible being?" And the rough-faced girl said, "Yes." "All right then," said my sister. "If you have seen him, tell me, what's his bow made of?" And the rough-faced girl said, "His bow? Why, it is the great curve of the rainbow." "Ah," exclaimed the sister in excitement. "Tell me," she asked, "if you've seen my brother, the invisible being, what's the runner of his sled made of?" And the rough-faced girl, looking up into the night sky, said, "The runner of his sled? Why, it is the spirit road, the Milky Way of stars that spreads across the sky." "Ah," cried the sister in wonder and delight, "you have seen him. Come with me." And taking the rough-faced girl by the hand, she led her back to the great wigwam and set her in the seat next to the entrance, the wife's seat. Then they heard footsteps coming along the path, closer and closer. The entrance flap of the wigwam lifted up, and in stepped the invisible being. And when he saw her sitting there, he said, "At last, we have been found out." Then, smiling kindly, he added, "And oh, my sister, but she is beautiful." And his sister said, "Yes." Now, these events seem important as well, and the picture of the bow will help us remember that the rough-faced girl is able to answer the questions about the invisible being, like what his bow is made of. She can really see him. Let's keep going. The sister of the invisible being then gave the rough-faced girl the finest of buckskin robes and a necklace of perfect shells. "Now bathe in the lake," she said, "and dress in these." So the rough-faced girl bathed in the waters of the lake. Suddenly, all the scars vanished from her body. Her skin grew smooth again, and her beautiful black hair grew in long and glossy as a raven's wing. Now, anyone could see that she was indeed beautiful. But the invisible being and his sister had seen that from the start. Now, this seems like another important event. The picture of the water will help us remember that when the rough-faced girl bathes in the lake, her true beauty is revealed. Then, at last, the rough-faced girl and the invisible being were married. They lived together in great gladness and were never parted. Wow, I know some of the questions that I had about the front and the back cover got answered when we read the text. But did any of the questions that you had when you looked at the covers get answered? And what do you wonder after hearing the whole story? What I'd like you to do is pause the video and write one question you had about the story in your journal.
All right. Write one question in your journal that you had about this story.
Did you write your question? Excellent. Nice job making observations about what you notice and wonder about the text, The Rough-Faced Girl. We will continue with this text the next time, but until then, be kind and do something great because you are capable of greatness.
All right, so let's stop sharing that. And we'll go right here. All right, so that is the end of that part of the lesson. We are going to work on deep dive right now, okay? And we are going to kind of review a little bit with a deep dive. Remember, we've talked about strategies, and we learned about strategies in Module 3 that helped us to be word detectives and try to figure out the unknown words, what they mean. So when we become word detectives and we try to figure out the meaning of a word, what do we look at? Well, we look at the illustrations, we look outside the word, we look inside the word, and sometimes we even substitute the definition to see if it does make sense. So when we use all these strategies, this is called the outside-in strategy. That's when we look both outside and inside the word for clues. So today, we're going to put all of our word detective strategies together and determine the meaning of a word. That word is invisible. Invisible. Now, I am going to read from page 2, all right? And inside this wigwam, there was said to live a very great, rich, powerful, and supposedly handsome, invisible being. Now, invisible. Let me point to it here too. It is right there above my finger, okay? Invisible being. Now, say that word, invisible. Invisible, okay? So we're going to look outside the word first to help for clues, to see if we can determine the meaning of this word. So I'm going to read both paragraphs on page 2 for us. Off from the other wigwams of this village stood one great huge wigwam. Painted on its sides were pictures of the sun, moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. And inside this wigwam, there was said to live a very great, rich, powerful, and supposedly handsome, invisible being. However, no one could see him except his sister, who lived there too. Many women wanted to marry this invisible being, but his sister said, only the one who can see him can marry him. So what clues outside the word invisible might tell you what it means? Well, I heard one sentence say that no one could see him. And I think in that second paragraph, it says that only the person who can see him can marry him. So I don't see the invisible being in any of the illustrations either. I don't ever see him there. Maybe it's because he can't be seen, right? Well, what word part do you see in the word invisible? Well, I see the word part at the beginning of the word. So the root word that we're going to be looking at is vis, V-I-S, all right? Vis is the root word, and it appears at the beginning. Now, vis means to see or watch something. This root appears in words like vision and visible. Vision means like our sight, and visible means that we can see it. So based on what we have found out, what do you think invisible means? I think it means that you can't see it. Or maybe you're not able to see something. So a good definition for invisible would be unable to be seen. So if I go back and add unable to be seen to that sentence that we read, it says, and inside the wigwam, there was said to live a very great, rich, powerful, and supposedly handsome, unable to be seen being. Makes sense, doesn't it? Okay. So we used our outside-in strategy today. Good work on that. And we are done with this lesson. So I will see you back here tomorrow for part B of this lesson. All right, friends, see you later.